at its very core, when we're in the pursuit of strength and stress adaptation, you don't get stronger from lifting weights, you get stronger from recovering from lifting weights. And if you continue to habitually do more stress in the training than what you're supposed to be doing, you're not going to be able to recover from that stimulus. You know, when I started, I did it because it saved my life. I started lifting because it saved my life.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is, I'm so screwed. I don't want to screw up your last name, Ross Leppala.
You got it.
And a world champion powerlifter, IPF world champion. We'll get into your lifts later, but you've been competing since 2003, 31 meets.
1999 was actually my first meet.
Wow. So, okay, we're going back.
Yeah.
And you're a coach, and what exactly do you do for Reactive Training Systems? Is it marketing?
That's what I do now. I've had a lot of different hats for Mike. I started out, I came on board with Mike in 2017, just coaching. And as we moved on from me being part-time coach to full-time coach, we added to my roles, and I was operations manager and then special projects, and now lead the marketing crew.
So a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And you're the host of the Project Unchained podcast.
Yes.
Okay. Now that that's out, if I screw anything up, it's usually those things. Did I forget anything?
No, not.
Okay. So when it was 1999 when you started powerlifting.
Yep.
What was the sport history before that?
Oh man, at that point I had no idea.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was not necessarily plugged into the sport per se. I didn't go to the meet because I was pursuing powerlifting. I was lifting for football, and my football coach was like, "Hey, you're getting kind of strong. Why don't you go do this meet?" And so I went and did this local small meet, and
was it one of those?
It was a lot of fun. And
high school meets? Like, I'm thinking back in that time.
Right.
Was it one of the high school?
I suppose you could kind of put it like that.
Yeah.
A dear friend and mentor of mine, John Teeney, he did a lot of powerlifting meets, and he hosted just a small, low-key, bench-only meet, very like low barrier to entry. He did it, I think it was like a $20 entry fee.
Mm-hmm.
Like he did it just to make sure people could get in and experience what the sport was like, and was never trying to make money. He just wanted to get people an opportunity to experience it. And I had a lot of fun. I almost bombed the first meet.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What weight class were you?
Oh, it was probably 75 kilos, somewhere in there. It's hard to recall what weight I was back then, but
Well, I like the bomb stories on the first meet because it's never the lift I think it is. So what's the story?
well, it was a bench only meet.
Yeah.
And the meet was on a Saturday, and Friday I went into the gym and maxed out and I hit 240 pounds. This was in 9th grade. I'm like, all right, well, I did 240. I'll go there tomorrow. I'll start at 240 and then have a couple cracks at 245, 250 maybe. And I'm in the warm-up room, and John, the organizer, he's coming over. He's like, "Hey man, are you sure you want to open this heavy?" I'm just like, yeah, man, I'm fine. Get out of here, old man. You know, young ego talking. And I go out there for my opener, and I sit down on the bench, and then I just get flooded with anxiety and realize, whoa, this shit just got real. And of course I take it out of the rack, and as I'm lowering down to my chest, it got heavier and heavier, and thunk. I'm like, press. I'm like, oh, doesn't move an inch. I'm like, oh, that's no good. I'm pretty demoralized, and he comes over to me as I'm sitting there on the side with my head buried in my hands. He's like, "Hey man, you spend too much energy doing a self handoff. Let me give you a hand. We'll go out there. I'll help you, and you'll get it." I'm like, okay. He pumped me up. I go out there. He gives me a handoff. He helps me out. He stays right there with me the whole time, yelling in my ear. I'm able to get it, fortunately. Everything I had was able to put into that one lift, and then 245 on the third was.
I was gonna say, so there's no third.
There was no third.
Yeah.
But it was just a really cool experience with him, and a lot of people talk about the community of the sport, and it was the first time that I experienced a sport where it wasn't just everybody trying to rip your head off. Football, everybody was always trying to smash you in the face as hard as they could and things of that nature. And everybody was trying to help you.
You didn't have the community experience with the team on football?
To some extent, yes. And to some extent, no. It really depended. But I think the hardest part for me and stuff like that was our school wasn't very good at sports. Mm-hmm. So nobody cared.
Okay. So small school?
Very small school. We were kindergarten through 12th grade all in one building, 300 students, all in the same building.
Well, by that time you accumulated a good degree of strength for a kid that age. Mm-hmm. So obviously the training, did you fall in love with the training more than you fell in love with football? Up to that time?
Nah, not quite at that time. Not quite at that.
So it was still just football.
It was probably both. I mean, because I saw that the weightlifting was going to help me with football, and mm-hmm. football gave me a place to express a lot of the anger that I had inside me. Getting personal, because I'm not scared to share this stuff. Before I found the weight room, I was suicidal. I was in a very dark and lonely place, and the weight room gave me a place to start to build myself out of that. Mm-hmm. And football was also the same way. Like, it gave me a place to hit something and hit somebody and let go of that anger.
Okay.
Instead of bottling it up inside and bearing it down.
Were there any sports before football?
Not organized, not really. Like, in our school, really, you couldn't get into any sports until there was like some basketball in 5th and 6th grade, which I played. And then, so once you got in 7th grade, you could play sports year round.
So with suicidal thoughts, what was the catalyst to that?
Well, I was bullied significantly in my youth growing up, and it got to the point where I believed it. It was not only were people calling me names and making fun of them, I carried it around and perpetuated that, and it became my own self-talk.
Did it impact your schoolwork?
Not in the way that they talk about it a lot in suicide prevention and awareness.
Well, just the bullying.
Say that again? The
bullying part.
Oh, no, it didn't. That was primarily more just like my loneliness and my seclusion. In fact, a lot of times from what I remember, I would actually want to do better at my schoolwork, thinking that if I was a good student and a good boy in that way, that I would get more positive attention rather than negative attention.
So was the bullying because of size, or because I experienced the same thing, but it was because of the schooling, the learning disability and not being part of the class and having tutors and having to say, all this. So what was the stem of that?
The way I look at it and reflect on it now, many years looking back, our town was tiny, and you had certain people that like were generational in that town. And if you were generational in that town, you were automatically like part of the cool kid group. My family was not generational in the town, and I didn't know how to get into the cool kid group. So there I was on the receiving end of the shit, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I look at it now. How much of that is actually true, who knows? Well,
it's a tough one, right? When you try to look back in hindsight to figure it all out. And,
right.
You think it's one thing, but then you remember something else, and it's like, then it's your fault. Then it's just a spiral of basically hell that you kind of go through. And for myself, the training was huge. Yeah. Right. Because then I could get bigger, I could get stronger. Then all of a sudden they're not going to fuck with me anymore. Then you get to a point where now you go from the person that's fucked with all the time to the person nobody wants to fuck with. Then you find solitude in that. That's not exactly the best, and looking back in hindsight, but at the time it was. It is because it provided that shield of identity. Did you experience that same type of thing?
Yes, but differently.
How so?
Where I suppose I realized that I used it as I was getting bigger and faster and stronger and better at sports, it became using that being better at sports to seek external validation and seek approval from my peers. And through being better at sports, I thought, oh, maybe now I can be in that cool kid group and I can stop being the brunt end of the jokes. Doesn't work out that way. It didn't work out that way for me. And I think the biggest part of that is because when we're seeking external validation, we're not being true to ourselves. We're not honoring ourselves. And we're wanting somebody to like us for something else other than just being ourselves. And I think whether we want to acknowledge it or not, the thing that we all really admire is authenticity. And we really admire when somebody is just bravely being themselves. And if we're seeking external validation, we're not bravely being ourselves. I'm doing something because I want you to like me rather than just me doing me. And if you like me, cool. If you don't, well, okay, cool.
Yeah, easier said than done. But when you're a teenager, it's a whole different world.
Yeah.
Right.
It's very hard when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
Very hard when you're a teenager.
And did you find a little bit more of that validation with the powerlifting? Because the difference there is your work has the reward because it's just you. Where if you play on a shitty football team and you're working harder than everybody else, it really doesn't matter.
Right.
Because you're still going to get stomped.
Yeah.
But the work reward ratio, I found, was better in the weight room. So it gave me that external.
Right. I didn't really find that until much later in life. And it took, probably, I was like 28, I think, when I finally had the moment of realization that I was still carrying around all this shit in me, and I was still wanting other people to justify me and justify my efforts and tell me it's okay instead of just me granting myself the permission that I needed. And, when I realized that, that's when I started getting some help and some therapy, and that changed my perspective on so many different things. And it was at that point that I started to learn to have that internal validation, like, I'm going to lift weights because I love to lift weights. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And so it's been really cool to come full circle like that. And a couple of years ago, I got to go to the Abs Pro powerlifting meet, and I had the most atrocious powerlifting performance of my entire career. And while I wasn't happy with my performance, I was okay.
Okay, so you're competing from that start age all the way up into 28, right?
Yeah.
So during that time period, you're getting stronger, right?
Yeah.
And you're moving up to different levels. And so what was it false validation? I mean, what was the catalyst to keep you pushing through, or did it just become habitual?
I think a lot of it was habitual more than anything. I don't think I understood or even realized what it was really doing for me. I just knew that I needed to do it. And, like I say, it wasn't until that many years later that I actually started looking at things with a lot more intentionality and reflecting on my life of like, why am I doing this? What does it do for me? And being aware of that.
Well, during that time, there's benchmarks, you're hitting PRs, you're doing all these other things, but the sport can be like a job, right?
Yeah.
When you're in that phase before you actually, for a lot of top lifters today, it's remembering why they started because it was fun, right? The top lifters, if all they do is compete with other top lifters, then it becomes extremely tedious because now everything matters. Nutrition matters, mobility, all these things matter. It's almost like a full-time job. If they're only around other people, it becomes this hyper-competitive environment. They're not going to local meets to see, the lady that just beat cancer, pulled 225 for the first time. All the great stories in powerlifting, which get overshadowed, and they'll lose sight, of what the sport's about, and they begin to hate the sport.
Yeah.
But they'll continue to still do the sport because it's, scratching that itch or providing whatever validation. So would you say during that time period, that's kind of where you were?
Yeah, there was still always a why to it. I think, again, now I'm just a lot more aware of that because I realize how important that is. Mm-hmm. For so many years, when I started, I did it because it saved my life. I started lifting because it saved my life. And for many years after that, it was something that I did. So here I'm going to do it. I like to lift weights. And I didn't really start to understand that, in all honesty, until around that same time period. There was a time, it was the the 2013 or 2014 Alaska State Championships. And I was struggling with my deadlift considerably. I pulled 500 pounds for the first time and then was just stuck there. I couldn't seem to get going. And I finally felt like I was starting to get a little progress and starting to maybe push past that barrier going into that meet. And in that meet, all of a sudden, here comes this kid, this 15-year-old kid in the same weight class in an Angry Birds t-shirt, goes out there and out deadlifts me. Like he's begging his mom to put 550 pounds, something like that on the bar. And can I do it, Mom? Can I? And he does it and goes out there and rips it off the floor. And I'm like, man, I just got out deadlifted by a 15-year-old kid.
With an Angry Birds t-shirt on.
Yeah. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I went down this whole pity party road the rest of the weekend. Oh, poor me. And it wasn't fun. It was a bad state of mind to be in. And Monday I get to the gym after work and I pull up to the gym and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh man, why am I here? What am I doing? And I just sat there for like 30 minutes looking at the gym, pulled the visor down, looked at the mirror, looked at myself, like, what am I doing? What is this? I'm like, it doesn't matter that I got out deadlifted by a 15-year-old kid. I might not be the best deadlifter in the world, but I love to lift weights. So I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to work my ass off because I love to do this. I've always enjoyed this, and I'm going to just be as strong as I can be for me. And that was a massive turning point. And I went in there and just did the work and started shifting that comparison aspect. While I like competing because it is a way to push myself further, I stopped putting so much value on it in terms of like my worth as a person. And that started to create a massive shift and open a lot of different doors. And it was really neat that from that moment, I've PR'd my deadlift in almost every single meet since that point. Just by virtue of, I think, not forcing things to be different than what they are. I'm just in the journey, feeling it out, experiencing it, learning what I can learn on the way, and thinking about, what can I learn from this experience that I can apply to other areas of my life? And then apply that to other areas of my life and see how that improves my life there. And then think, what did I learn from this? And apply that to lifting. And it just becomes this like upward spiral of learning and growing through the experience rather than chasing an outcome to beat you. Because that's where I was at before and it didn't work. It didn't serve me.
How were you dealing with the bad meets before that?
Well, if I had a bad meet, I would have a bad next 2 weeks. Or something along those lines, but it would significantly impact my mood. I'd be an asshole to people for no reason at all. And I wouldn't have a good time with life. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. Why let that, especially at this point, like most people that are powerlifting, it's a hobbyist sport. It should be adding value to your life, not detracting from your life. We're not out there chasing multi-million-dollar contracts like NFL players and NBA players. If it's not adding value to your life every single day, maybe you ought to consider your time spent elsewhere or shifting how you go about it.
Up to that point, what was going on else in your life, work-wise, school?
Well, up to that point, I suppose, again, that was all coming to the moment of realizing that I was just carrying around a lot of that external validation and always seeking other people's approvals. I mean, a core part of my life was people-pleasing tendencies. Like that's how I operated, not just in powerlifting, but elsewhere. It was, my life was riddled with that kind of stuff. I very much wanted other people to like me and approve me. So I was always doing things, giving myself away in ways that in the moment I wasn't aware of it, and that plagued all kinds of relations, particularly romantic relationships. Women don't want people pleasers. They don't want you to do things just because they want your approval, that's not going to be a very fruitful relationship for anybody. And the ones that do will just take advantage of you, and you're just going to have a lot of resentment in the relationship. So when I started going through that process of therapy and shifting my perspective in powerlifting and seeing how changing that influenced my life, that's when the life shift started happening and changing.
What I'm trying to do is to anchor certain behaviors that were going on prior to that, because as you know, as we both know, there's a lot of lifters that we personally know that are living in that.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to listen to this and say, I kind of relate, but that's not me.
Yeah.
But in all reality, it probably is.
Right.
Right. So at that point, if I was to ask you at that time, would you have said, powerlifting is your number one priority? Everything else can just fuck off.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, like, to a good extent, yeah. I was never, I suppose, dumb enough that I wouldn't like show up for work.
Yeah.
I wouldn't show up for work because I need to go train for some reason.
No, but would you select the jobs based upon how it would impact your training?
Oh, there is definitely some of that at some point. There's some ebb and flow in there along the way in the details, but semantics. I think one of a fun way to frame it, especially being a coach for Mike and RTS, since we program everything based on RPE. One of the ways that I look at it is when you look at your training program and you're supposed to work up to a by 1 at 8 is a very common benchmark protocol we use. If you're always blowing past your by 1 at 8 on a benchmark, you're not doing it correctly. And that's a reflection of who you are and how you're showing up in life. You're chasing.
Yeah. Explain what by 1 and 8 is for people.
A single at an 8 RPE. So a lot of our training will work up to a single at an 8, and that's the benchmark strength. That's to kind of calibrate how strong am I today. How strong you are is going to fluctuate from day to day, moment to moment. And so we're trying to capture bigger loads on the good days and pull back on the days that aren't so good. And we need to, if we're going to auto-regulate the training, we need to capture the variance within that. And a lot of times when we're using the sport as external validation, we're using lifting as this way to kind of validate our existence and boost our self-worth and self-esteem. On those days that are down, we're going to force it to still try to be an up day. And we're not going to listen to where our body's at on the day. And so if you're by 1 at 8, last week was say 250 kilos, and you come into this week and you're down because maybe you didn't sleep well, you ate like crap, you partied too hard last weekend, something along those lines, and you're not ready for 250, and you're like, oh, well, 250 was easy last week, I'm 255, 260, let's fucking go. And then you tank it and it turns into a by 1 at 9, by 1 at 10. And you do that on a regular basis, and that's a pattern, then that's an expressive pattern from your life playing out in your training. And that ought to be something that lets you know and indicates like, hey, maybe you're using this for something other than what you think you are. Or your mindset and perspective is influencing your training in a negative way. Because if you're at its very core, when we're in the pursuit of strength and stress adaptation, you don't get stronger from lifting weights, you get stronger from recovering from lifting weights. And if you continue to habitually do more stress in the training than what you're supposed to be doing, you're not going to be able to recover from that stimulus.
Dave Tate here from elitefts. I'm here to talk about our new items category. I'm very familiar with that because I'm the one that vets the products and a lot of the times loads the products. So when you come to elitefts.com, new items, top tab or hamburger menu, what you're going to find are the items that we have personally vetted out for you that are the best in the industry and items that are going to help you. We don't bring any items onto the website that are a waste of time or just crap for that matter. So everything in there is put in there to be able to help take your training to the next level. You want to go to elitefts.com, new items, and we'll see you there. Yes, and that's when I was speaking to Mike a couple of times, that's anchoring the RPE. You know, it's a balance. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
But you just brought up an even more trickier thing, right? Because if you're person A, you know, prior to you experiencing this in person B, person A is going to have way more swings and variance than person B, right? Or it could just always be off, you know, with person A, because they're kind of always off.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, that's the tricky part of that whole thing, is trying to balance that and be aware of that.
Yeah.
But going back prior to that Angry Birds moment, I guess that's a good way to define that.
Yeah.
Going back prior to the Angry Birds moment, convincing you of that would have been a challenge.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're so locked in to that identity that anybody that's going to try to advise you, you might listen to some things like do this exercise, do this.
Yeah.
But you're not going to listen to the important things.
Yeah.
You know, which is, I call it kind of being on the other side of the table. It's a kind of a good thing to have that experience, because you remember what it's like, especially if you're a coach.
Yeah.
Because people are trying to speak to you, I'm sure, and you're just like, shut the fuck up. You know, they're speaking into the void, but now you find yourself on the other side, you know, speaking to that person. You kind of know the frame of reference that they're in, but you still have to try to connect. So this RPE is kind of a way to sneak in to connect. Would you say that's true?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Because like, that's where I've grown to, is that I really enjoy the intersection of the mental game and mental health and well-being and powerlifting, and how they can serve each other. And when I see a lifter that is constantly overreaching on their RPE and blowing past where they're supposed to be working, that's a big sign, like, hey, you know, there's probably a conversation we need to try and pull back the layers on and see what kind of mindset stuff we need to work on and create a bit of a shift here. Because at the end of the day, one of the other things that I like to think about is, if we write the training and it's supposed to be this at an 8 and this at a 7 and this at a 7, if we're always going past that, then we're not actually doing that training.
Mm-hmm.
So now, if it's not working, I don't know why. Whereas if I write this training and you're doing it the way it's written and it's not working, I know why. It's not the right training for you. But if you're not applying it right, I need to fix that to know if this is the right training or not. And clearly, one of the things that we're all after is we want to be able to put more weight on the bar. And there's a lot of layers on how to put more weight on the bar than just training. And a lot of it has to do with the application of the training and the choices that we make and are making on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. And the way in which we make choices is driven by our habits and behaviors and patterns. And all of those are influenced by so many other ways outside the gym that most people probably don't really even realize.
Most definitely, because when discussing mindset, which is a really broad term,
for sure,
I find most people that are in the lifting community see that as what they need to do to get psyched up to do a lift, right?
Right.
And they don't see it, and they're two different parts, right? There is that which is called arousal, but then there's the actual real mindset, which prior Angry Birds is ignoring that. You know, post Angry Birds, you see the importance of that.
Yeah.
Where the greater that becomes, the less this really matters. You know, the arousal part before the lift. Here nor there, right? And getting into that is the tricky part. And so post Angry Birds, you make this realization. What happens next? Because a lot of people make that realization, right?
Yeah.
But then they just hit a brick wall.
Yeah, well, it's just continued to evolve from there. And I keep finding more and new and different layers to that. And, you know, turned 40 last year. turned 41 February, and I'm stronger than I've ever been before. And I got a lot fucking more to go. Like I look at it and I'm like, man, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I grew up the whole, once you turn 40, you're over the hill and it's all downhill from there. And I'm like, man, I can't even see the peak yet.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go.
So what were your first steps?
What were my first steps?
Because at some point therapy came in.
Oh, right. Yeah. Therapy came in. It was around that same time, went through some coaching, life therapy, and that gave me the mindset of, hey, it's skills. We're just learning skills. Just like in training, we're learning skills. In life, we're learning skills. So we learn different skill sets and we learn how to apply them more efficiently and better. How do they serve you? And just going through the process of like reflecting on it to learn how you're using and how you can use it better so that it continues to evolve and go upwards and expand. Just because you learned how to squat doesn't mean you stop squatting. You're like, oh, how can I be more efficient with my squat? And it's kind of like the at least my view on technical mastery. I don't look at technical mastery as being a spot you get to and you're done. I look at technical mastery as, if we say use a pendulum analogy, and you first swing a pendulum, it's got this big swing left to right. Technical mastery isn't to stop the pendulum from swinging, it's to control it in a slight oscillation, because it's not going to ever stop. It's always going to be in motion. So how can we dance with it? How can we play with it? And from a squatting technical mastery perspective, being able to feel and be aware of where you're at in space as you move to make micro adjustments in the moment. That's technical mastery, but it's not ever done. Maybe you're experiencing some discomfort and you need to change your stance a little bit before some of that inflammation might calm down and the discomfort go away and you move back to your regular stance. Different things of that nature that you're flowing with and moving with. And for me, I look at stuff like that, like, oh, I'm learning that in lifting. It's a skill. How can I apply that skill to my life? When I was in college, I almost flunked public speaking because the second I had to speak in front of anybody. And a couple years ago, when I realized, like, man, I'm pretty good for myself finally. Like I feel amazing mentally. I'm not constantly having to fight these demons anymore. Now I realize my silence only perpetuates those things that I struggled against. So I want to start talking about them. And that's when I brought Project Unchained to the table, was wanting to be open about having had suicide issues as a child, as a kid. That was when I was 12. So I was pretty young to be suicidal. And mind you, when you look at the statistics, suicide's the second leading cause of death for people between the ages of, I think it's 10 and 35, something like that. I mean, that's really freaking high for that young of an age demographic. So it's a very real thing that people need to be aware of and talk about. And having been through that, having lived through that, having experienced what it was like to be in that state of being, I need to talk about it. And prior to that, like, I wouldn't have known how to talk about that. I wouldn't have known how to open up a conversation like that in public. And so now I have aspirations to do a lot more public speaking on that subject. And have done a few different events, but want to do more. With the ability to go out in front of a crowd, as I think about it, is really uncomfortable.
Interesting, though, because you do that on a platform when you lift weights.
Exactly, man. Exactly. And that's the thing that broke that barrier for me, is I'm like, everything I do in powerlifting is uncomfortable. I'm really good at doing things uncomfortably. Cool. I got that skill. How can I apply that skill to this? Okay, I'm going to be uncomfortable. Do it anyways.
So speaking about it was one of the skills to build from that. What were some of the other mental skills that you had to work from that period forward?
I think the ability to remain calm in those heightened states of nervousness, anxiety, arousal, whatever it may be. I've personally found that I perform better on the platform when I stay calmer and I don't put on this outward display of aggression or emotion. I gotta think about like a Blaine Sumner he wilds out, grabbing the bar. Let's go.
Yeah.
Anytime I try and do that, I move like crap.
Yeah. Well, everybody's arousal curve is going to be a little bit different. So.
Yeah.
And you still wonder with him, how much energy are you burning? That
sure.
could be applied to the lift.
Yep.
Mentally, I think you can still get there without expanding all the energy. But I'm talking more about the aspects of self-talk, things more in that nature, because when people are caught in that cycle, the way they speak to themselves is typically way worse than the way anybody else would ever speak to them.
Totally.
So it's how did you go about breaking that cycle or pattern? Because I don't think it ever goes away. It's still there. You just got to reframe and know to reframe, but it's easier said than done. So what was your path on that?
So I'm a big fan and promoter of journaling. For me, it all started with the realization that my mind, when it gets rolling, it's fast and it'll spiral out of control. And when I journal, it slows all that down, gives me an opportunity to organize it or slow it down to not be so overwhelmed by all the amounts of thoughts. And then I realized that that's also then a place where I can, this is what I'm thinking, but I want to rephrase it and think this instead. And that really helped to change that self-talk, because that was a huge problem. And the way I've grown now and to look at self-talk is the things that you think and say about yourself are the things that you believe about yourself, and what you believe about yourself is going to shape and change how you show up and participate in the world. So if you want to participate from a place of high quality, then you have to have high quality self-talk and empower yourself with choice. You get to choose how you talk to and about yourself. It might take some training to do that. So does our pursuit of strength. We can't walk into a gym and expect to be strong via osmosis. No, we got to put the work in. I remember it was actually the last time I was here when the RTS crew and me and Mark Robb and Mike were out here, and we were here for the Arnold, and we came out here and trained for a day. Mark Robb and I got into a conversation that evening. And I told him, sometimes I feel guilty about all the time I spent powerlifting and lifting weights in general, and used it as a way to hide from the demons in my soul. And I'd used it as a way to just kind of push those away and avoid working through them. He's like, no, man, you can't look at it that way. You got to look at it as the discipline you learned from training is taught you the discipline that's going to take you on this mental journey. And it's the same way with self-talk. I had to apply that discipline to the self-talk and to train that self-talk to be in a place that served me.
Some will say the training is how they deal with the demons.
Yes, some will say that.
Yeah. The journaling, the interesting thing I found with that is writing it out so you can legibly read it makes you slow down.
Yep.
To think about it. But on the flip side, just writing shit out gets it out.
Yep.
Right. And so if it's just scribbles on a page, it's out. Then when you can look at what you actually wrote without even thinking about what you wrote, and then ask yourself, how would you feel if somebody actually said that to you? Then that makes you reflect hard.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what you're telling yourself.
Yeah. While
you're going through that. So I think some people will resist doing that because they don't want to take all that time, and sometimes it's just not even that, it's just scribbling shit out, and you may just write, I'm a piece of shit over and over, or whatever it's going to be, but it's out. Then you got to why did you write you got to reframe it. But I think journaling is a huge thing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely huge. And lifters will do it with their training,
Right.
But they won't do it with, even to the level of how do they feel after the session or even before the session.
Yeah.
And that can play into the RP as you're talking about. You can go into the session with two entirely different frames of mind, where the ultimate goal would be able to go in there with more of a stoic, a baseline frame of mind.
Yeah.
Each time, which is hard to, it's the pendulum.
Yeah.
Right. It's an impossible thing, but you can tighten the swing, for that. And that, I don't think people put enough time into trying to figure that all out. And maybe you got to go through the fucked up phase first.
Oh yeah.
Where you're amped up on all kinds of pre-workout shit, listening to AC/DC on the way into the gym and getting all amped up, probably more amped up than you're even going to be in the gym before you get there. I don't know, wish I did, because if you could eliminate that phase, because if you could take where your mind is now and then put it in the body of 10 years ago.
Yeah.
What a gift that would be.
For sure. For sure. I mean, a lot of people say stuff like that. And at the same time, you have to go through the experience. And where I think about some of this stuff, and how I used lifting before to, like I said, like escape and not deal with any of those demons, and how a lot of people like, oh, lifting is my therapy. It's not that is wrong. It's that it still misses the change. Because if we're exercising that demon, if we're needing to blow some steam off, that's fine. Blowing some steam off is not a bad thing. But what about the rest? If you think about it like a pressure cooker, if you're just taking a little bit of the pressure off, there's still all the stuff that's left in there. There's still more pressure in there. It's just not blowing the top off.
When you say all they're doing is kicking the can down the road?
Yeah, there is that. And that's only sustainable for so long. Like sometimes, yeah, that's what we need to do. Sometimes we need to kick the can down the road. I can't deal with this right now. I need to just fucking get by. And again, yes, sometimes that's the answer. Sometimes that's what we have to do. But again, that's only sustainable for so long. At some point, we need to find a different way.
Well, if we relate it back to training, how is that any different than being RPE 9.5 at all times? You can't do that.
Right.
You might be able to get away with it for a little while, but then what's going to happen? You're going to crash and burn. So again, it's the same things that we kind of already know from training that apply over here.
Yeah.
And I think conversations about that, for lifters to hear, because they're already doing all these things.
Yeah.
Way more than what we could possibly even talk about in this podcast.
Yeah.
That all can transfer, but they don't see that transference.
Yeah.
It's almost avoidance,
yeah.
With what they're doing. So there's, the journaling to help with the self-talk, and what were some other the mental tools?
Oh, meditation's another big one for me.
How'd you start that one? Because that's a tough one for people to start.
Well, let me start with the idea that meditation is a really great way to measure your ability to sit with yourself. And if you were to be able to like apply a value scale to it, your ability to sit with yourself in complete utter silence with no stimulation at all is in direct correlation with the state of your well-being. So if you can sit with yourself with nothing, you're good. The more you need to have entertainment in that moment, the more you need to not be with yourself. And that's not a good place to be. That's a really big sign and indication that there's something amiss. And if there's something amiss in that way, then every aspect in your life is less than what it could be otherwise. your training, your relationships, your work, everything is going to be less than what it could be otherwise. Meditation, just like other things, is also a skill that takes time to develop that skill.
No, but you just made a really interesting point that just kind of popped in my head, is that's where you start. Like some people try to start with the visualization and the meditation and all these timed things and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they just start with how long can they just sit and not be distracted? I mean, they're going to have mental distractions, but not sit and have to reach for a phone.
Yeah.
Not sit and have to be in front of the TV. Not have the music on.
Yeah.
Just start with just being with themselves. I bet most people can't do that for a couple minutes.
Yep.
And that might be as a society how far this has regressed.
Yeah.
To where that's where they just need to start. Just, when you get in your car to be able to go home, just sit there for as long as you can before you turn it on.
Yeah.
That might be the start, right? Because I think a lot of people are trying to start with apps or whatever it's going to be. That is too much of the app's a weird one too, because it's kind of like on your phone and it's just kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's kind of a weird one, but anyhow, that just kind of came in my head as you were saying that, because I struggle with because people will ask, how do I go about visualization, which is kind of like the end result of all this stuff. It's like, you got a lot of ways to go before that. Well, where do I start? That's probably the easiest place to start. And then from there, can work into the meditation. So how would you have them work into the meditation part?
Well, I think another way to get started is to try and release any preconceived notions that you have on meditation. Because I think the thing that blocks a lot of people is they tend to think that, well, that's for Buddhist monks.
Yeah,
and I need to sit on a mountaintop and be zenned out. No, not. It's not what meditation is. That is a thing that the Buddhists do, is meditate a lot. But there's a lot of different ways to meditate. And at the end of the day, it's really just the ability to sit with yourself and acknowledge your thoughts and let them pass by. Because there's a difference between our thoughts and thinking. Thoughts are all those random things that just pop into your mind. Your thinking is you engaging them and trying to problem solve them. And not every thought deserves our attention. Some of them we need to just let pass on by. And as we meditate more and more, you cultivate that skill to let that cloud in the sky pass by. And as you, again, further cultivate that skill, instead of it being a mostly cloudy day where it's thought, it becomes a partly cloudy day. There's less thoughts in the sky, and then you might make a sunny day where all of a sudden you can just sit for 10 minutes and not have any thoughts. And that's the moment. And what a lot of times happens in that space is clarity with yourself in a much deeper way. Because when you have, again, say a mostly cloudy day and you have all those clouds in the sky, it's hard to see some of the things that you might need to see and be aware of. But if you can clear out some of the junk, you can start to be aware of some of the other more meaningful thoughts and deeper thoughts that you might be hiding from. Some of the maybe painful ones that you might need to give a little love and care and attention to. That can shift a lot of things. Maybe it's a lot of people are really scared to change careers. That was a big one for me. I went to school for civil structural engineering and was practicing that for 12 years before I started to work for Mike. And it was scary to leave that, to go to coach a hobbyist sport full time. Like I'm giving up an engineering career with full benefits package to coach. Like, it's kind of scary. It's been one of the best choices I've ever made in my life. And I don't know that I would have really been able to make that choice and make some of those shifts and changes if I hadn't been meditating, because it went against the culture and it went against a lot of the things that I was taught and told as I was growing up.
So would you say through the meditation, you established your core values?
You could say that that's definitely a helpful thing to connect with from there, is a lot more core values, a lot more like, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up and participate in the world? And being more aware of that and aligning my actions and self with that, rather than operating from a place of sparsity and fear.
So so we got three things now, right? So we have the journaling, we have the meditation, and the self-talk. And talk therapy. So I guess 4. Or did I say talk therapy twice? How important was the talk therapy? When you look back and you look at all these tools in the toolbox, how would you rate them? That'd probably be a better question.
How would I rate them? All important?
Yeah, I know. But normally the way they come into play is one at a time.
The talk therapy then has to be number 1, because that came first. That came before all the other things. And I don't know if the other things would have come about without that being first. It was almost as though the talk therapy gave me tools to bring to the other stuff for myself. Learning to open up with a therapist and be vulnerable and say the things that were rolling around in my head and say them out loud gave me the opportunity to go, man, you're really fucking mean to yourself, dude. And the awareness to that was the cue to start shifting away from that.
Did you have to go through several before you got to that one?
No, I think when I went through that, it was all, I don't want to say easy, but it was pretty seamless, I think would maybe be a better word. It wasn't easy, but it was fluid because I was ready.
Okay.
I was so ready to change, and I knew that, and I knew it was time. I was tired of it. I was tired of living life the way that I'd been living life, and I'm like, I need to change. And so I went into that fully bought in and ready.
Would you say that you were close to being at the same point that you were when you were 12?
No, I was not suicidal like that at all. It was definitely very different.
How would you define it? Just dark? Angry?
Which part?
The part that gave you the motivation for the talk therapy, because a lot of people are kind of there, right? And some people have to go through several therapists. Some people don't like the fucking, some people are just not ready.
Yeah. I think anxiety. I think when somebody says they have a lot of anxiety, like that's your cue. So the way I experienced it, two moments in life from anxiety that shaped that belief. The first one, I was in a not so good relationship shortly after I moved to Alaska. And I was not in the best shape physically. I was a lot of things were getting neglected, and I went and got a physical and was having a lot of high blood pressure and a lot of rapid heart rate. And the doctor's like, oh, you're depressed. You need anti-anxiety medication. Here you go. And sends me on my way. And well, that wasn't quite it. A few weeks after that, that's when I found out that my, I suppose, fiance at the time had cheated on me. And I'm like, oh, all right, bye. We're done. And as painful as that was, I'm really glad that she did, because I needed that level of, I guess, dishonored action towards me to wake the fuck up. Because we were in a really unhealthy relationship. We both were toxic and hurt and brought all our pain and hurt to the table, and neither one of us were in a good spot. And right after I broke it off, I looked at that bottle of anti-anxiety medication. I'm like, I don't fucking need this no more. And I threw it in the garbage, and I hadn't needed it a day since. And then a couple of years after that, I'm mowing the lawn, just got into a new relationship with my now partner, still partner, Vanessa, and we were long distance at the time. And I'm sitting there mowing the lawn, and I'm like, you're replaceable. You're real far away. She can get rid of you real easy. And all of a sudden I started thinking about that, and I just got smacked in the face with a baseball bat of anxiety. I got so overwhelmed. I had to shut the lawnmower down and sit down, and I was just, oh God. It was wild. And I'm like, it was just this moment of a deeper realization of, I've had this with me my entire life. This has nothing to do with her. She's just this catalyst right now. What am I carrying with me that I'm unaware of? And how do I learn to set it down? I have no idea. Let's get some help. And that's when I went and got some help. And that was one of the easiest and hardest choices of my life. You know, you go to get therapy, and I'm like, oh, I'm frugal, I'm cheap like my dad. And I look at the bill for all this, and I'm like, I don't want to spend that money. And I said to myself, I'm like, you know, you spend all this money to lift weights and all this money on these other things. Spend some money on yourself. Invest in yourself for a change, man. And it's been the best investment I've ever made.
How long was it then until you started to see a change in your training?
I don't remember those details, to be honest. I mean, I know it had an impact. It's been positive, and the more, again, as it evolves and I play around with all those different things, it's constantly still continues to up level. Because you learn it, and you also learn different layers and levels to it along the way. And I suppose what I mean by that is, if we think back to the RP example, I suppose I started overreaching less. Fast forward, now I never overreach. Now I'm at a point where, what was it, 5 weeks ago, I missed a bench rep. I was supposed to work up to a by 3 at 9, and I missed the third rep. And that was the first rep I missed in training in over a year. Because I know when I get to that point, like, just rack it. If I'm supposed to go to a by 3 at 9 and I get to rep 2 and I know that third rep's not going, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to put the bar back in the rack. That missed rep doesn't help and serve me in any way, so I'm just not going to do it. So it's just like, it gets better and better and better kind of a thing.
So the initial changes were basically unconscious. But at what point, because there had to be a point where you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is definitely making a difference in the training.
Oh, I think back to that abs pro meet that I mentioned earlier, that was one of the points that was like, wow, this is really solidified and real in a way that I hadn't quite realized it yet, because here I go have that meet. I probably shouldn't even have done the meet because I was dealing with a chronic nagging low grade like hip injury. But here I get this opportunity to go to Abs Pro. It's kind of a big deal. And I get to go to Ireland. Like, let's go. So I take the opportunity anyway, and I go over there and have arguably the worst meet of my powerlifting career. Go 5 for 9. I almost bombed on bench. But I get done and I'm like, oh, I'm okay. And I was still good. So it's like, it becomes this thing of like, I'm no longer taking the outcome personally. I can use it as an objective data point to see if the inputs are correct. But when the outcome happens, I'm not going, oh no, poor me, or oh, look at me, yay, I'm good. It doesn't matter. Same with like winning the Masters World Championship this year. Was cool. It's fun. Yes, winning is fun. It's more fun than losing. And like, duh.
Yeah, nobody's going to disagree with that.
Right? But at the same time, the second I got off the podium, I was like, all right, next. Let's keep going. You know, I'm going to hang out and go on vacation with the family here afterwards, but next. Like I'm not done. I'm going to keep going. And I wasn't like, I didn't feel this inflated sense of self. I didn't go, oh, hey, everybody, you pay attention to me. No, it doesn't matter, because that's not the thing that defines me. What defines me a lot of times are the things that people don't always see. And that's the thing I think a lot of people forget in sport, is, which is hard because a lot of sport, mainstream sport, just glorifies the winner. So that's where a lot of people tend to place the emphasis, even though it's the work behind the scenes that really matters.
With RTS and working with clients, I guess we can pivot a little bit, because when you're working online with somebody, there's limitations, mindset, all the other kind of stuff. The RPE can be a bit of a gauge, but how do you go about the programming of that while keeping that in mind? Because there's still the programming that you're doing, which is, set based upon the RPE to be able to pendulum all that through.
Yeah.
And most people are probably going to fall within the general frame of what that program is. And there's going to be the outliers, which, what percent would you say that would be as a client base? 20% may fall outside of that general scheme.
Are you referring to in terms of like somebody that's
not compliant? So they're compliant, and it's not, you got to troubleshoot it.
right?
Okay.
Right.
So with the troubleshooting metrics, leaving this part aside, where are you looking?
I'm not sure that I quite.
All right. So
where are you going?
You have a block of training that they're going through, and it could be underreaching, it could be overreaching, but they're not hitting where you want them to be. And you have all the metrics in there. Maybe we should step back and talk about the metrics that you guys use to auto-regulate the training, because I'm assuming that they've listened to the Mike's podcast and kind of know what's going on. So let's step back a little bit and talk a little bit more about the RTS training.
Okay.
So how would you elaborate that in a way that won't take 3 hours to elaborate? Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Well, the core way that we write training is through the process called emerging strategies. And emerging strategies, the way I like to think about it, is it's a scientific experiment. We're going to write a microcycle, say a training week, and we're going to repeat it until you stop adapting to it. And once you stop adapting to it, then that's your time to peak. That will vary from person to person. But once we know what that is, we'll no longer go past that. So let's say somebody adapts for 5 weeks, and then on week 6, they fall off and they don't have an elevated performance. Okay, now we know that your time to peak is 5 weeks. So every block from there on will be just 5 weeks. And then we can repeat the scientific experiment with a different microcycle. So what that is then doing is we're reducing the amount of change, reducing the amount of static and noise within the microcycle. And then that way we can measure the response in a 70%, 80%, or 90% volume block. We might see that somebody responds really well to 70% or 80% or 90%, but we'll start to see a clearer picture of what percentages, what zones they respond best to, so that we can use that going into the meet. Because what we see is there are people who will respond better and have a better rate of gain to lower intensity work going into a meet. So I don't care about what powerlifting history says. If powerlifting history says, oh, you got to do 70%, 80%, 90% peaking into a meet. Okay, well, what if it doesn't work for somebody? Like, I don't care. I want to find what works best for you. And this just becomes a way to reduce the noise in the signal to try and find what works best for you. And what's really neat about that for me is when I go through that process and individualize the training, I see the training is a lot different for everybody. And one of my favorite places for that is when I get to work with a couple. And for example, right now I have a couple that I work with and their best friend. So all three of them train in their home gym. And all three of them have wildly different training because the way that they respond to training has shown me that they need different training. I can't write them all the same thing. They're all built differently. They all have who knows what other like biological differences inside them where muscle attachment points are that change leverages and different things of that nature, so that they get training that's written for them versus some system. And so like emerging strategies is super flexible. I can take different ideas from other areas and put it within the emerging strategies framework and it still work. You can put all kinds of things from conjugate method into the emerging strategies framework to use a lot of those tools and it worked for people.
The fascinating thing that I've always found with that is most periodization that you're going to look at works back, right? Mm-hmm. So here's me day. You're going to, if it's classic linear, it's the most basic example. This moves forward, mm-hmm. you know, so it's the opposite, which is kind of the beauty in it, you know, because you have this basically the same levers to pull. But once you establish that time to peak, kind of, how much does that really change for people over time?
It stays pretty dang stable.
Yeah.
Like when Mike first started creating this for powerlifting, because he learned it, I forget, drawing a blank on where he first started learning the concepts, but it wasn't necessarily within the powerlifting world. And if I recall correctly, I was the third person that he put on it. And the first block can be a little bit weird sometimes. Sometimes that first block you'll go longer than what it really is. But it stays pretty stable. So for example, I was a 6-week time to peak for a real long time. And we changed it to a 5-week time to peak. Not because I couldn't do 6 weeks, but primarily because sometimes week 6 was a little bit tough. If I was aggressive in the development block, week 6 would generally be not quite sustainable because I'd carry too much fatigue into it. But I could be more aggressive on a 5-week spectrum and not suffer that week 6 blues, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so that's been, we're in 2025 now. He started that with me in 2015, I think. So it's been like 10 years. And I started working for Mike full time in 2017. And I've had a couple people that I've reduced their time to peak by 1 week. I haven't had anybody that I've increased their time to peak. But to have been applying that for nearly just a little under 10 years and only have reduced a handful of people by a week, it's pretty stable and pretty trustworthy.
How have the other metrics evolved over time?
Oh, the biggest one would be the stress index. Stress index would be what Mike started to create as a way to quantify the training load. You know, you have volume, relative volume, intensity, frequency, all that stuff. Stress index is just another training metric to track, like, how hard was the training? And that's evolved in a bunch of different ways, one of which was to create a central stress and a peripheral stress and break it down so that, like, the higher the peripheral stress, the more like muscle base it is, like hypertrophy, versus something that central stress is more systemic across the entire body. And that way that allows us to capture the difference between, say, a barbell back squat and a leg press, and or sets of 10 versus sets of 3. And we'll know based on that what some of that stuff comes out to be. And that's really neat because everybody's going to have a different stress load that they can handle. And when we break it apart into the central and peripheral stress, that allows me as a coach to see if this person responds better to a higher magnitude or higher intensity training than a lower intensity training through central stress balance.
What metric are you using to measure those?
It would be a complex proprietary equation.
But there are metrics,
Yes.
right, that aren't subjective.
Correct.
Right? Because
there's some subjectivity to it because it's based on the RPE of the set.
okay.
So depending on how the RPE comes out will change what the stress is.
But it's not based upon the individual's perception.
The stress equation is not. No.
Okay. Right. That's kind of where I was going with
Right.
that. So it's not a questionnaire.
Yeah.
How did you think the leg presses felt?
Yeah.
How did you recover from that?
Right.
Or vice versa
Right.
with that.
Exactly. And then too, like I can look at it from here's my theoretical stress that I wrote and here's the actual stress that came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then I can know like, well, if I wrote it as a 25 stress index and it's coming out a 40, like what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like what in the world are you doing? You know, and I can look through the training and see, oh, overreach. Hey, slow down. This isn't going to work.
Now, if they're in that state, how long does it take for them to come out of that state, that overreach state?
Oh, that would depend wildly on.
Yeah. But in general, because a lot of people will think they're going to be able to come out of that state within a day or two.
Oh, yeah. No, I think if we look at it from a time to peak standpoint, you know, and your time to peak is 5 weeks, generally speaking, we can pivot and deload in a week.
Okay.
And be back into development work. The longer your time to peak is, the longer your pivot needs to be. That was another reason why we shortened my 6-week time to peak to 5 weeks, because a general rule of thumb is 1/3 the development block length. And usually error on the side of less. So that's why it was 5 and 1. If it was 6, then it would be 2 weeks. And I just mentally had a really hard time with 2 weeks of pivot, because usually in the pivot, it's a little bit different than a deload. It's not just a volume reduction. It's also, we're training a lot of alternate stance movements. We're training the neglected muscle groups. We're training different energy systems. So it's pretty different. And that's the pivot. It's pivoting you into, we want to reduce fatigue and hit some neglected systems and pivot you into the next stimulus. And it's one of those things, I understand it. I see it as necessary. I get it. And I still don't like it.
Well, yeah, because you're doing things that you're not used to.
Yeah.
Now, the trick with that pivot, though, is you got to be careful not to introduce stimulus that's going to create more overreaching.
Correct.
Because it's going to be, for some, it could be very foreign if you're just throwing in shit they haven't been doing before.
Yeah.
So it's, elaborate on that so people kind of understand more of what it is. So with that pivot, it's not this host of things they haven't been doing for 5 years.
It might be at first.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's a new to me client, I might be asking them to do things that they've never done before.
Yeah.
You know, if you're like deadlift, for example, we do alternate stance movements in the pivot, unless there's some like physical consideration that says, no, we can't do that. So as a conventional deadlifter in pivots, I pull sumo. And it's not a problem for me. But at the same time, if somebody's never pulled sumo, like I've had lifters sign up that they've never pulled sumo, and the first pivot they got to pull sumo. Well, how do I pull sumo? I'm like, okay, well, we got some learning to do, and that's fine. It's okay. So there's some novelty in that. We might have some exercises that we need to learn how to do. But what we see is that a lot of times that...
Wouldn't that reduce the load even more so, though? Which would make it kind of actually better?
Well, the bigger thing that drives the load reduction in a pivot is we're going to do a lot more higher rep work than lower rep work.
Yeah.
Right. So generally speaking, sets of 10. Because again, we're wanting to get in neglected muscle groups and systems. So we're trying to get some of that stuff in. And yes, that will also drive a load reduction or a magnitude of load reduction and intensity reduction. Ish. Like sumo, I have a weird sumo. By 10 at 8, I can do like, by 10 at 8 makes my sumo E1RM look really good and makes me want to pull sumo. And then I go to pull sumo with intensity and it doesn't work. It's like my by 10 at 8 E1RM compared to what my actual E1RM is like a 50 kilo difference.
It's probably why you don't pull sumo.
Yeah. But like trying to pull reps like that with conventional, no, my low back starts getting so fatigued that it's like, no, dude, you can't do that. But sumo, I don't have that same load in the low back, and I can pull reps for days and days and days and days. So it's kind of weird.
What are some of the other things that you've seen evolve with the trainings that you've been associated with it? 'Cause that's a big one. I mean, that's a giant one.
Yeah. I think probably the biggest thing that I've seen over the years of applying emerging strategies, not just in myself, but one thing that's been cool is like RTS continues to grow. We continue to add more coaches onto the staff. And what's really cool, every time we add a coach to the staff, you get an injection of another perspective and different ideas and different approaches. And that's been like one of the core things to see that's been fun with emerging strategies is how different ideas and concepts can fit within that framework and also be effective. And so it just becomes a tool that becomes broader and wider. And it's almost as though it has sections and uses and applications, which to me is really cool because that allows me to even further individualize the training for a person. And like I say, I don't care what the answer is. Like I don't take offense to, oh, well, this training should work for you. It doesn't. Okay. Well, I don't care if it doesn't work for you or not. I want to find the thing that does work for you, and learning to set those biases aside and do things that, oh, I wouldn't have done that 5 years ago, but now it works really well. So like some lifters, one lifter I write training for, I would look at his training, 5 years ago, and I've been like, that's not enough work. How is anybody going to get stronger off that amount of work? He does. I wouldn't, but he does. Okay. It doesn't matter. It works for him. That's all that matters, is that it works for him. Even though it doesn't look like there's enough stimulus there to drive an adaptation, it clearly does for him. So what?
How do you, because you've served multiple roles over time, how do you, because that's the fun part, like the program, that's the fun part. Then there's all the other parts, the business, where now it's more of the marketing part. So how do you balance those different hats that you need to wear? Because you can be, everybody should know, you can have the greatest program in the world, but if nobody knows about it, you're kind of going out of business.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Mike's he's great to work for. Like he's super reasonable, super flexible. We have a ton of autonomy for our work schedule. So as long as like we're getting our things done, it doesn't matter. And if you can't get it done, just speak up. Then we need to move different things around. So like for me in the marketing role, one of the biggest things is just because I'm in marketing doesn't mean I'm also the content creator. It's really just a matter of having somebody in this position as a organizer. And that's my primary focal point, is organizing the creation of content and who's creating it and when it's getting created and when it's getting posted. Because I wouldn't be able to be the primary content creator and also the organizer and also the coach. So it's just a matter of like looking at what the workload is and what's reasonable. And if it's not, then we just have to shift and change it. And that's probably the biggest thing, is Mike knows all that stuff, and he's not he's not unreasonable in terms of managing what workload is. And as well, like, we're a team of coaches. We all need to be able to present ourselves to the community so that they know that while Mike is the founder of RTS, he's got a team of coaches, and we're all pretty capable and competent to write the training.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the marketing, there's still the analytical side, of the content.
Mm-hmm.
What's working, what's not working. So that all takes time to be able to figure out too.
Oh yeah.
So that's where I was talking more about the balance, because building the schedule, is what it is, but it's the management of the schedule that can become tedious and something that you want to hit your head over with, hit yourself with a shoe, to try to figure out these metrics.
Yeah.
So how have you gone about that in an emerging world where the metrics are basically changing monthly, daily, weekly?
Right.
I guess where I'm going with that is the views, on a piece of content. Some people may chase that bigger metric, but at the end of the day, that still has to ultimately result in the clients.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're looking through the marketing funnel. So that becomes a little complicated process to be able to know what the actual conversions are of these things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm going with the question is, how have you navigated that world while still being able to do all the coaching side?
I think from a personal belief standpoint is that we have to just always be grounded in speaking from a place of like, this is who we are and this is what we do and this is what we believe, and speaking like our truth and what we believe and how we go about it, and less of a oversensitivity as to what content created what conversion. Because if we're speaking our truth and we're speaking our reality, ultimately that has to be the core thing. As you say, the metrics change every other week. So if they change every other week, like, what are you really measuring? Sometimes that becomes a tricky part, because if it changes, well, that changes everything that I just figured out. So I tend to not get too overly concerned about that and try to be more focused on, is this how we actually want to present ourselves to the world? That to me becomes more important.
So what are you guys working on now? Like, anything in the pipe that isn't proprietary, patented, things that you can speak about?
Well, hopefully Mike won't get mad at me. I don't think he will. I'll tell you about two things we got going on in the background that are not public facing yet. One, we made a change in the past few weeks, months on our tech side, and we have a different person in our tech chair, and that will hopefully allow us in a couple of months, when we get a couple of other background things done, to make some other bigger changes and upgrades to some of our tech side. Most powerlifting coaching companies are still using Google Sheets, and we've been away from Google Sheets for years and years now. Our tech side's really cool. Like, I can write training for a lifter within our program builder that has all our training metrics right there. As I write it, I can see what the stress is. I can see the total stress, the central stress. I can see how much stress is upper body, lower body, horizontal pulling, vertical pulling, different things of that nature. And I can write it, and then I can load it right into their training log. So when they go into their training log, all they have to do is enter, I did 100 kilos for 10 reps at RP 6. And makes it super smooth and easy for them as well. We also have that set up so that other coaches can use our same tools. So any coach in the world can sign up and use our training lab tools. You don't have to be an RTS coach to make use of the web tools that we have. Anyway, when we get some of those background things done for like database, backlogging, storage, stuff like that done, we have several upgrades planned to that to continue to make it more robust in doing things like that. So that's really exciting. The other one that we're really excited about is coaching mentorships. We've done a lot of like course education stuff through RTS Classroom, where Mike teaches about emerging strategies and how to write training and things of that nature. Well, we've always had an itch to do a coaching mentorship, and it's one of those things you like talk about this idea for a long time, but you're not quite sure how to do it. And then finally one day the light bulb turns on and it starts to become more clear on how do I want to actually create this thing. And that vision is finally starting to come to fruition for RTS. And so we're hopeful that in Q3 this year, we'll open that up for public consumption and start doing some coaching mentorship.
And what do you have planned for your own training? Like what's next?
My own training, I'm currently getting ready for Masters Nationals in May. I want to try and pursue a multiple title world championship, Masters World Championship, see if I can do it again. Primarily because I personally look at the longevity of it as being not necessarily from like a winning standpoint, but from a like longevity to me speaks on the totality of making smart choices over a long period of time. And anytime you can stack up making smart choices over a longer period of time, the higher quality outcome is across the board. And at the end of the day, that's one of the things we're after. And to me, yeah, PR is great, but there's more to it than that. And that's part of what that, from an objectivity standpoint, means to me.
Where are the Worlds going to be this year?
It's scheduled right now to be in Cape Town, South Africa. Masters Worlds, anyway, is scheduled to be in Cape Town, South Africa. There were mumblings that they might move it. I have no idea. I'm not on the inside of the privy of that information.
I haven't stayed up with this, but how is the IPF, Powerlifting America thing, how's that all shooken out? Because I spoke to Mike about it when he was out here last time, but that was a while ago when it was just kind of a giant mess. Is it still a giant mess, or is it kind of shaken out a little bit? I mean, it's powerlifting, so it's always a mess, no matter where it is, no matter what discipline it is.
You know, I personally wish that the sport of powerlifting could be more cohesive.
Yeah.
You know, because like I said earlier when we first started, the idea of community, and that tends to be like one of the biggest thing that touches a lot of people when they come into powerlifting is the community of the sport. But then at the same time, when you get going a little further down the sport and you get to higher levels, you see kind of some of the brokenness of it, and that kind of sucks. And
it's like the Wizard of Oz. You know, you finally get to see behind the curtain. Yeah, you didn't. Probably better you didn't know that.
Yeah. Yep, I know. And like the way I tend to look at it is, you know, especially in the U.S., with there being so many different federations in the U.S., to me, it's just every time there's a new federation, a different federation, you just come up with, oh, well, I don't like your rule. You have two dudes in this relationship in this federation, and one person doesn't like one rule, and it just becomes a swinging dick contest. And like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go do my own federation. And that's how the fracturing of it has begun. It's just...
That was happening when I started competing in '83. So I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, my advice has always been those that are coming in, you know, find where they feel the most comfortable and to have fun with it.
Yeah.
You know, and with the federations, looking back, which I found interesting is, and I don't think we see this as much today as we have in the past. So I do see this as a good thing, where one federation or one style of lifters is bashing the others, where, you know, geared lifters hated raw lifters, vice versa. I think that's kind of all distilled, down to where that's a good thing, from that to where it's all powerlifting done differently. I think everybody kind of agrees on that. Is what used to bother me is when you would see that bickering and people not realizing this is where they came in at, so if they came in at USPF, if I want to go back far enough, or, APF or whatever it was, that's kind of all they ever knew.
Yeah.
That was the path, that they went. And you can't criticize somebody that spent 5 years traveling this path that didn't really even know there was a different path, or expect them to jump over to a different path.
Yeah.
It's still all powerlifting. And I do think some of that, has kind of been filtered out. We still have the problem of all the federations, but the interesting thing to me, and I'm sure you can attest to the same because you've been in this for so long, is you can take lifters from all different disciplines, put them in the same gym, and they all have an amazing time.
Yeah.
They have a great time. It's only online, which is not real, where it becomes perceived is fractured and all this other crap.
Yeah.
Where essentially the majority, I got to preface that, all want to see everybody else do better.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing about powerlifting. Everybody wants to see everybody else do better.
Yeah.
For the most part. There's 1%, 2% that may not.
Yeah.
Right. But whatever. That's everything. Right. I would think in a way, the sport as a whole, this is going to sound a little fucked up. I might be even speaking out of turn. It's more unified than politics. Because if you take, 50-50 or whatever you want to do with that, and everybody kind of wants the same thing. Yeah. Through that. And how do you perceive the whole landscape of that? Because this is just my perception and bias and everything else in place.
I don't know that the full shakeup of this is played out yet. I think that there's still more to shake out from the whole USAPL IPF split, and to be honest, I tend to stay in my own lane and not pay attention to it too much.
Well, that kind of echoes what we spoke about at the beginning of this podcast. You can't control it.
Right. And I can't. It's all outside of my... Yeah. Unless I were to try and get super involved with one of the federations or the other to be on the EC and have influence of change, and no, fuck that. That's not my jam. That's, I appreciate those that do it, and that's not me. That's not me. I really appreciate your sentiments though. When you talk about where the people and where the lifters are at compared to where the politics of the federations are at. Because I've always looked at it this way too, even if we pull back another layer and even generalize it even more. A lot of my training back many years ago was done at a small local mom and pop bodybuilding gym. And I always thought it was interesting that bodybuilders and power lifters always had this battle against each other. And I couldn't always help but think what the fuck does that serve anybody? We're just lifting weights, man. We just lift weights differently, but we're still lifting weights. We still have fundamentally, we still have the most important thing in common is that we refuse to wither away on the couch in weakness. We want to be a stronger version of ourselves. We want to lift weights and be jacked. One just wants to have a higher 1RM. One just wants to have better abs. But at the end of the day, we still just want to be strong. Why does it matter? And so in powerlifting, we just want to lift weights. And I think on the political realm, if the political policymakers of the sport would realize that we all want that, how can we find a path forward that is more unifying of that? And I remember many years ago, a conversation came up with another powerlifter of, wouldn't it be a beautiful thing if we could have one powerlifting federation that just had a different category to help everybody. You'd have
Mm-hmm.
a tested side, an untested side. You'd have a raw, you'd have a single ply, you'd have a multiply, and just have every one of those different divisions, and you sign up for where you want to go. There you go.
Seems simple, right?
Seems really fucking simple. Like, holy shit, imagine that.
Oh yeah, until you get egos involved.
Oh,
And then here comes the problems. Were there any topics you want to talk about I didn't bring up?
I'd love to talk about what the thing I have personally coming up.
Yeah. What's that?
With the intentional athlete.
Mm-hmm.
The intentional athlete, this came to, it was one of those like coming to like full circle things for me after winning worlds was, whoa, that was cool. And next, like it didn't change what I was going to do. And I reflected on that a lot. Like, how do I integrate this? Like what is the thing that's integrated, and how do I teach that? Because having the moment from abs where I had a horrible performance and it didn't matter, to winning worlds and it doesn't matter. How can I teach that? And that's where the intentional athlete came to fruition, which is going to be like a powerlifting seminar. It's about powerlifting, but it's not the normal powerlifting seminar. We're not talking about sets and reps. We're not talking about programs. We're talking about all the things we do that support that, and how then that turns around and supports life, and then how life turns around and supports lifting. So it's like the journaling, it's the meditation. How do we do that? How do we apply that? What are the things that we're doing to get more out of our lifting and to give more into our lifting? And I'm going to host that at my house with my home gym. It's a small immersive event. There's only about 12 tickets being sold, and it's all inclusive, food's included, lodging's included, and I look to do that about 2 to 3 times a year. So I'm really excited about where that's going to start to unfold. And we're doing our first round on May 2nd through the 4th. And the big reason why it's a small event is when you have a smaller event, you can get into a deeper layer of conversation. Mm-hmm. Then when you go to a seminar that's got 50 to 100 people, like at that point you can only, the presentation is the presentation. You don't get into the layers and depths that gets into it from an individual layer. So that's a big reason why it's going to be small. I want to, like, the first thing we're going to do Friday night is light a fire in my fire pit and sit around and talk about why. Why do you lift weights? Why do you power lift? Why do you compete? And get into a deeper layer of that and how that can evolve. Like, why I lifted when I was 12 years old was to save my life. Why I lift now is to continue to raise skill development, and like what can I do and experience in a different way that continues to help the evolution of growth and expansion in my life, and get into different layers of that with people. And we got a bunch of cool stuff on the schedule for that. So I'm really excited about that coming to fruition.
No, that can be a game changer for people.
Yeah.
To be able to understand that, because in a way you're hacking things, because if they stay in long enough, they're going to come to this realization, but the sooner they do, the better their progress is going to be. Because the worst time to come to it would be when you're so broken up that you only got a couple of years left, joint wise or health wise. Yeah. Because of that. Because then you look back and like, kind of what I said earlier, like imagine if you had all that, then you put it into that 30-year-old frame. Yeah. Right. Yep. You know, where would it be now? How? Because it's exponential at a certain point. You know, it just stacks upon each other. Yep. How can people go about following you, finding you?
They can reach out to me on Instagram.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.